All right, so for the next challenge, what we're going to do is we're going to open up the annual report, which is challenge number 2. This is the first challenge that you actually have to submit. So I'm going to go ahead and click it. You'll see that it's going to download in the bottom left corner here. I'm going to go ahead and open it up. Once it opens up, you'll see something pretty similar to this. Again, it's a few multiple pages, so it goes back down to about 7 pages at this point. There, again, are a lot of different guidelines in here. I encourage you to take a look at them, but for the purposes of the video, I'm going to focus in on the example. So as we move forward, I want you to see that this is the only challenge that's going to have multiple examples. So we have part-time, we have bail of, and we also have quick mit. Ideally, if you don't understand the example that I'm going to run with, you have a few different options to go through. First and foremost, if you look at them, you'll notice that all of them have the same formatting. And what I mean by formatting is the information up at the top, and then also this left margin. And in a general sense, or in a holistic sense, they're actually all one page. We only want one page. So please, as creative as you want to be, please try to stick to the formatting. Please do not deviate from the formatting. Please do not make it longer than a page. The reasons for this are that we want to make sure that we have comparable documents that we can show one against the other. So it makes it much more difficult for the judges to understand the comparability if you don't follow the format. So in reference to the format, you'll notice that you have dates. You'll have content that's specific to the company that you're working on. So if you happen to have a website or an address or anything of that sort, that's great. Please include it. If you don't, that's not a major issue. If you have a logo, that's also great. If you don't, a nice text title will work perfectly fine. Each one of them also has a title that says Annual Report to Investors. The reason for this, again, you'll see Annual Report to Investors. The reason for this is that this letter is meant to articulate to your investors and stakeholders where you are within your business as of the end of the year. So for each of the documents that you download, you might notice that the date says December 31st and then a year. That year should be the year that you're completing this challenge. So in this example, it should say 2019. As you go through this document and you see other dates, just make sure that they represent the year that you're going through the challenge. The very last paragraph represents a very, very forward-thinking statement. So that will actually be the year following the challenge. So in this example, it would be 2020. Now I'm going to go over the different components that you have here. And I want you to take a look at each of these and see how they compare to the other information that we just talked about. So, for example, product or service progress with evidence, customer and market progress with evidence, and then team progress with evidence. Those are direct callbacks to the information that we covered previously in the stage assessment number 1. In terms of the person that you're writing to, while this is a competition, I want to make sure that you understand that the people involved in this will not more than likely have a very good perspective of what you're trying to do. So it's important as you write this to add clarifiers that explain the nuances of your business or what particular thing that you are doing within your business. However, the frame is going to be towards an investor or a stakeholder. Now, defining an investor or stakeholder should be pretty simple. You may be thinking to yourself, well, I'm not interested in having an investor, or I'm not interested in having a stakeholder. But those people, to give you a background, are people that are interested in what you're doing or have a personal investment, whether that be monetary or otherwise, in seeing your success. If you're trying to figure out who is that in my life, the answer for that question is the person that gives you honest feedback. So on average, I try to represent that this is not a person that is related to you, and it is not a person that is a good friend of yours. It is a person that will tell you yes or no, was this good or was this bad? and that be definitive and ideally objective information, not subjective information, on whether or not what you were doing or what you did was good or bad. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit over here to the part-time example. And part-time, as an example, is the example that you'll see throughout the entire challenge. So the only example that does repeat is this one. That's why I'm using it. It's also a personal example in that it's something that I personally was working on a couple of years ago. I'm still currently working on it. So don't think that this is fictional. This is a real thing. However, some of the information in it obviously didn't get accomplished. I'm not a millionaire at this point. So it's a tangible, real-world example. I'd like you to look at it and view it as that. And if you have questions related to that, I can always go back and explain those because I know this one personally. So again, from a formatting perspective, we're going to start with that title, annual report to investors. The date should reflect the end of the year. If you have collateral such as a logo or a website, please try to include that. If you don't, the simplest formats of what your company is named. If you have an address, that's great. If you have any sort of callback or information for contact, that's also great. Please include that in this upper margin here. You'll notice the next thing is Dear Investor, because that's who we're referring to. If we think about investors a little bit more, we understand that they are successful at some point. They're your stakeholder. Ideally, you trust them to give you good information because they've earned that respect in some form or fashion, meaning that they have a track record of success and they've done things that are successful you can look back to. That's why you're including them on this sort of board of investors perspective. And then finally, again, this left-hand margin, we ask that you do include because it'll help us know what segment of your business that you're referring to as you complete your version of this document. Because this is a Word document, you should be able to utilize the example in here and just edit over. So you shouldn't have too many problems with repeating this format. If you do have any issues repeating the format or questions about the format, you're welcome to contact LaunchSA at team, T-E-A-M, at launch, launchsa.org. So now I'm going to go into the content of the example and what you should be trying to recreate. So this first paragraph here represents an introduction to your company. It also represents some nice to knows, and it introduces the discussion of the progress that you've had during the year as it relates to your product or service, customer and market, and your team developments. And again, it's for the current year. In the body of the one-page document, you're going to be discussing in order of the importance as it relates to your business, your product or service progress, your customer and market progress, and your team progress. These can actually be changed in terms of whatever makes sense for you and whatever relates to your business in whatever order you feel. So in this example, the reason that they're ordered in a specific way is that for this company, we did not have a product to sell. So our biggest accomplishments for the year, first and foremost related to building that product. Then it was focusing in on developing the market, which was number 2, and then accenting our team, which is number 3. As we continue down, the very final paragraph is going to be a forward-looking statement and also a thank you statement for being engaged and interested in this particular product or service or company that you're working on. It's going to call out to more than likely a year following the challenge itself, with ideally a level of progress or an accomplishment that you hope to get to within that next year. Finally, it ends with a statement that thanks the investor or the stakeholder for their time in reading and having that engagement level that supports your continued growth. So as I continue forward, I'm going to start with what is part-time. If you understand what part-time is, then you ideally will understand what these accomplishments mean to that business. So part-time, in the very simplest of ways of talking about it, is an Uber-like system, so an on-demand system to find talent, meaning workers, that can fill positions in hospitality, meaning primarily restaurants, on demand. The reason for this product, or why it should exist, is because in the restaurant or hospitality industry, it's very common for people to not show up for work. Reasons aside, it's just an issue. Turnover in this industry is a major factor. It creates a very big problem for the owner in maintaining their optimized optimized level of work, right? So if you don't have a person that shows up and that person is your chef, or if that's your busser or your dishwasher, this is a very crucial component to making sure that all other operations are running at peak efficiency. So if those people don't show up, everything else by way of falls flat and creates likely detriments to revenue or cash for that day. It also affects the other aspects of the business in terms of employee morale and otherwise. So part-time, as you'll see in this first paragraph, I explain in a very simplistic sense what we do. For you, if your product is complicated, try to find the simplest way of stating that in a sentence, what you do. Analogies are often a good way of doing that. So as I mentioned before, part-time is like the Uber for restaurant help. Ideally, if you understand what Uber does, then you can also understand what part-time does in that same sense. So in this first sentence, I actually say part-time matched skilled worker talent to restaurant and hospitality employer needs across Texas and other urban markets in 2019. At a very high level, you probably have at least some idea of what we do. Another statement that I put in this first paragraph, I put in as a nice to know. So the second sentence here, our part-time workers found enough added work to boost their earnings by 10% on average, and local businesses gained enough talent on demand to similarly increase their net earnings throughout that year. This is a nice to know statement. As you can tell, it doesn't tell me what I've earned, it doesn't tell you what I've earned as a business. It doesn't give much information in terms of how that has affected my business, but it's a nice to know in terms of this is what we've done to solve the problem or other ways that we've increased the opportunities where this problem existed. For you, that may manifest in a different way. Put in your own terms. I'm basically giving more perspective on how this tool is useful. Last in that first paragraph, I introduce the segue into the progress that we've achieved during the current year that we're participating. So here are the progress highlights achieved in our product, customer and market, and team developments that we made during the successful 2019 year. So you're probably thinking to yourself, well, 2019 hasn't happened. What do I do here? What do you mean? All of these statements that you're going to be making are going to be framed in terms of past tense, as though you've already accomplished them. This is, in essence, a visionary report that you're giving to somebody at the end of the year. Well, visionary currently, but at the end of the year, it would be actual statements that you've done that they can evaluate objectively to say whether or not you've actually made progress. So as we segue into the body and the most important components of this submission, we're going to be honing in on the areas that are, again, most successful accomplishments, most noteworthy accomplishments achieved during the year. To make this even simpler for the person reading it, we're actually going to be bolding things like dates. You'll see here I put April, that's bolded. It's actually even in a different color to make it even more obvious that it's important. Completed or important accomplishments. So for example, we completed our first version of the app. And then related to standards of maintenance, it was deployed with 99% uptime, meaning that it was basically stable. That's another important accomplishment. Users or payers. So we had 200 part-timers, which represent the workforce for this app, and 50 businesses, which represent the paying customers for this app. Again, dates and other avenues of revenue. So, for example, we won $30,000 in May. That's a tangible number, right? We don't want to use percentages in this document. We really want to get to tangible numbers as much as we can. So we won $30,000 from a competition, which at the time there was a competition called SA Tech Fuel. Unfortunately, for this particular example, we didn't really win that money. If we had, maybe we would have gone somewhere else. But I stated that we won that money. For you, that would be mentioning that you won X amount of dollars. You have to be specific about what that is for your business from the Venture Challenge. That final award ceremony this year will take place in June. So keep in mind that if you're looking at this in a preceding year, to look at the dates as they relate to awarding or finals and make sure that those things align. So we won that $30,000 in May. We successfully launched in other core communities. And you'll see that those communities are specified, such as Houston, Dallas, and Austin. And then we also made it time-bound by saying in October. And then also other things as they relate to people involved in the business. So we hired a full-time salesperson, not just that we hired a person, but what that person does, so full-time sales and customer support in June when that happened, and what that person did or what doing that did for the business. So that increased our employee pool from 200 users to 1,600, and businesses paying from 50 to 400 over the course of the year. That also equated to revenue growth from $5,000 a month to $50,000 per month by the year end. So you see numbers as they relate to revenue, as they relate to users, as they relate to businesses. Your business may not equate to the same exact pieces. So you may only have users, and those users are also the buyers. In this one, it's a two-sided marketplace. So we have users that do work for people, which are the people that pay. Yours may be somewhat different. In terms of different variations on product, if you're a service-related business, for example, a fitness business, your products may represent the ways that people can purchase. So a 2-hour slot for fitness training, a 1-hour slot for fitness training, a 30-minute slot for fitness training, personal one-to-one fitness training versus group exercise, different variations. Those may be the products that you have. Your market may exist in a retail location. So if you launched in a retail location, we just opened our fitness center off of Bandera near Leon Valley. You know, that's more specific than this one, which gets into more, because it's a digital platform, maybe harder to relate. So that's just another example. If you do an actual product like the cookies that I mentioned in the previous example, new product launches can be considered part of the product development. Offering in new markets, such as new farmers markets, may be a part of customer and market development. In terms of your team development, adding on new people, again, that should be straightforward, but also adding people worth note. Maybe you've secured a very high-level investor, or you've gotten a new mentor or coach onboarded that's got very key industry experience. That's also worth note. None of this in here should be fake. So when I say it shouldn't be fake, because we're referring to things that happened during a year that hasn't happened, you should be completing this as realistically as possible. So if you mention that you're pursuing a loan, that should be a real achievement that you actually do sometime within the year. If you say that you're interacting with an investor that is not Venture Challenge, that should also be stated and should be tangible. Ideally, if it's a group, maybe you can reference them. If it's a person, maybe you can reference them. That should be at your discretion, but understand that you should not be putting things in this document that are far-fetched or that are not truly likely to happen during the year. So as we continue to look at this document, I'm going to go through the different segments so that you have a pretty good understanding of what we're trying to do here. In the first one, as I mentioned, you can reorder these as to what components you think are most important for your trajectory. So in this particular instance, we started with product or service related progress because the product did not exist at the time that we were working on this. So at the beginning of the year, part-time as a company and as a product wasn't available. So in April, we successfully completed our first product, which was our web app. And that product remained up with 99% reliability. This allowed us to then pursue our customer and market. So you'll notice April, we completed the app, and it was up pretty much all the time. So as it relates to our product progress, that was most important to us. While there may be other things that happened, there may be other things for you, you don't necessarily have to go much deeper than whatever you think is the most important things. And because it's only a page, you may have to pick and choose which things that you pursue and put on this paper. After we had the product developed, then I spend the majority of my time talking about the customer and market progress. Again, for you, it might be a different scenario. You may spend more time talking about other things. But because I needed the product to sell to the customers, that's why I spend the majority of my time in this document referring to what happened after. So as we launched our product, prior to launching that product, we did a lot of lead list development and content development that engaged users to basically sign up for pre-trial before we actually had the product. So anytime you can do a lead list or anytime that you can aggregate people before the company's actually started, that's a really good way of showing traction ahead of time. So the industry, meaning the hospitality or the restaurant industry, one thing to note that's specific to us is that word of mouth travels extremely quickly. It also travels at a very low cost of acquisition. So very quickly, if you share word of how you can make more money in the industry, people will take that in and they'll share it between each other very, very fast. So by doing very minimal things like hosting an industry night at a bar or just generally kind of paperletting them with, hey, you can make more money doing stuff in the industry this way, we were able to get new customers onboarded at a very low cost. You'll notice that for me, was not bolded because it's a nice to know. What's more important is how many people I actually got using the system, which goes to that next sentence, which is we were able to get 200 people to use the system, meaning part-timers, and 50 businesses as paying customers during our first month of operation alone. So that pre-work helped us get to the point of having customers. Being local in San Antonio, we won a local prize. That's our next paragraph. It does relate to customer and market because it relates to the revenue itself and the winning or money that we got. So we got first prize in a local competition, $30,000 in May, and we used that money to invest in our customer growth, which helped us get into new markets like Houston, Dallas, and Austin by October. You'll notice that there probably were other markets that we got to before that, but the most important ones, because the most notable ones, or the biggest ones, were Houston, Dallas, and Austin. That's the ones that we mentioned. I also mentioned by October, so all of those things may have taken place in different months, but as of October, we were in those other markets. Going down for team, the biggest highlights there were that the money that we won enabled us to hire a new person, which started in June. That person helped us grow our user base and our customer base from 200 to 1,600 users, meaning the workers, and then from 50 customers to 400 customers, meaning the businesses, the restaurants that needed the workers. And then finally, we were able to grow our revenue. Revenue does not account for expenses. Revenue is purely the money that comes in the door. So these numbers look really great, but realistically, they only represent money coming in the door, not the costs associated with getting that money. We grew our revenue from $5,000 a month to $50,000 a month. The body of this document, those are the most important parts that I wanted to mention. At the end, I transition into the final piece, which is next year we expect free cash flow. We expect our team to grow even further, and we hope to launch in other markets that are similar to San Antonio, such as New Orleans and Las Vegas. From an industry standpoint and from a city-to-city standpoint, those are very similar to San Antonio, meaning that they have a lot of hospitality businesses and their culture runs in a similar fashion. This equated to us ideally achieving our growth in 2020 of getting to $200,000 of monthly revenues by June. You'll notice that's not bolded because that is a forward-thinking statement, meaning it's referencing a year past the challenge. If you were actually sitting at December 31st, this would be where you would actually be saying, we hope to get there. It hasn't been achieved. The next year hasn't been achieved. This document's relating things as though you have achieved them, but only for the current year. Finally, I'm ending with a thank you for your continued support and our team name. Ideally, if you have any questions regarding how to complete this or how it relates to your particular business, you can actually send those to us directly, again, at team@launchsa.org. Further, if you would like to have us review these documents as you complete them for consistency, comparability, and just general feedback, please use us as a reference for that. Send them to us. We will give you critical feedback, and we will help you mold them to be the most efficient documents that you can produce for the challenge. That represents Challenge 2, the first one that you actually submit back to us, which is the annual report to investors. So we just finished up our Venture Challenge annual report, and now we're going to move into Challenge 3, which is our milestone map. Ideally, at this point, you've taken some time to actually work on Challenge 2 and digest the information from the other videos. I understand it's a lot of information, so taking it one step at a time and letting us know where you have struggles is important for your overall success. So make sure that you're in communication with us. We can definitely help you as much as you need help in composing or thinking of these documents. So I'm going to move forward to Challenge 3, which is our milestone map. This is the second challenge that you'll be submitting. When I click that, it'll open up in the corner again. I'm going to go ahead and open it up, and it should look pretty similar to what you're seeing in front of you right now. So the milestone map takes the information that you placed in your annual report, and it breaks it down month over month. And again, there are guidelines for these challenges. We do encourage you to kind of take a look at those. They're important for the composition. But as with the other examples, I'm just going to run through to the examples. So you notice in this, Resource B, this is actually a document that you can type into. I'm just going to show you that that's feasibly possible. This is a Word document, so you can go ahead and enter that in, and as you save it, you have the opportunity to just kind of print or save those, just the submissions that you've done, and return those to us directly. One thing I'm going to note, just at the bottom of the one that you submit, you do have the ability to leave in notes as they relate to things that are outside your control. The only reason I bring this up now is because once you get to the example here, that information's not there. So just keep in mind that once you finalize your document, you'll be able to leave some notes as they relate to things that you feel are not clarified, or things that you are having trouble explaining, or just other notes that you feel are contingent upon other successes you're planning throughout your year. So as you look at this document, you'll notice that there's a pretty simple format. Again, it follows the same scenario as the other ones. We have our milestone achievement map title, the team or the company that's working on it. If there's any collateral elements there that you want to include, such as your website, maybe it's Facebook or address or phone number, contact information, you're more than welcome to do that. And again, if there is a logo, that's great. If not, simple text kind of title version would be fine. You'll notice that this document is ordered in terms of product or service milestones, customer and market milestones, and team milestones, as well as also given the month-by-month categorization. So this one actually begins in March, but for yours, you should begin in January. The example or the inputted format you have available is from January to December, so please use that. You'll notice that gives you a blended approach. You'll have stuff that you have actually finished, and you'll have stuff that you haven't yet accomplished. It's important to kind of put those two together. It'll help our judges understand what progress that you've currently worked on, and then also what you project to actually have accomplished. If you're to compare your annual report to your milestone map, you'll notice that there should be things that are very consistent. If you think like an investor, you'll think of this whole process as essentially due diligence on making that investment. What I mean by that is that if I was to invest in your business and I was to ask you to show me your financials, and those financials did not represent the same information that we talked about, that would bring up a red flag in my mind that there may be something else missing or going on, and it would detract from your ability to entice me further on that investment. If I look at what you've said, or if I listen to what you've said and that compares very well to the tangible documents that I receive from you, then you likely have a better chance of, again, enticing me to make that investment. All things equal, it projects that you are who you say you are and that what you're going to accomplish is equivalent across the board. I believe in you. And trust is, totally a part of making that investment. If I can't trust you, if we can't trust each other, then it's going to be very hard to move forward in that process. So month by month, this should be very simple for you to compute. As you start, you probably have work that you've already completed. If you look at this, you'll be categorizing that in terms of the segments we've already discussed. Ideally, if you've ordered your annual report in the same fashion, it should be easy to target that in. If you've mentioned the date, such as when I said in April we launched the product, you look at April and you see that the product was launched, meaning that I developed my web app. When we launched our system, we had users already. You'll see that that information is the same as what was in your annual report. You'll notice that there's more information that I did not include in the previous document because of either space or importance. So for my team, I didn't mention who is involved in my team, but that's actually put in my document, my milestone map, because I have a chance to mention it. You'll notice that I talk about the lead list that I was working on and how I did pre-registration. That was not mentioned in my annual report document because it was less important. I also mentioned where I'm kind of putting this in play for the Venture Challenge. You're more than welcome to include those components within your documents as well. My product uptime, so you'll notice that when I mentioned that my product was up pretty much after I built it, I didn't really have any additional segments to state in terms of my product as it related to this project. So as you go down that whole scope, you may realize that there's not much else to articulate. Maybe once you've set up the different variables, like you can purchase my fitness time at 1, 2, and 3 hour blocks. You don't really need to add new products for that. So you may realize that it becomes stagnant, and for what it's worth, you just kind of state that these things are working out, and that's perfectly fine. As you add new elements, maybe you started adding a cooler where people can buy Gatorade, for example. That might be something that you mention in here. Other things that are important for customer and market milestones, bolding areas that relate to revenue or money are extremely important. So our first revenue came in May. That was the $5,000 we started at. And we won $30,000 from our Tech Fuel Challenge Award. I include those and I bold them because the investor or the person reading them is going to want to know, how am I doing in terms of my revenue, or how am I doing in terms of the progress that I have? If your product is, or if the product or service that you're offering is going to not have demonstrable revenue within a year, that's perfectly fine, but you need to articulate to us what progress that you're making that's getting you to an eventual point of revenue. We have had people that have won this challenge that have not had revenue within a year, but they made a very articulate case in saying that once they got the product to market, that they would be able to make revenue. So if you don't have that, don't feel excluded, don't think that you're at a loss. You just have to make a very strong case in other areas that shows why you would be worth the investment. So you'll notice one thing that I personally am not a big fan of, and that's that these numbers seemingly are stagnant and they're even for you. If you take a much more dedicated and realistic approach, you'll notice that your business probably doesn't follow even numbers. There's probably some amount of seasonality to your business. So think about those and try to think deeper as to how those might affect you. So for example, if you're a fitness business, there may be a lot of stuff that's going on at the beginning of the year, primarily with New Year's resolutions that equate to a lot of people buying in. Your beginning of the year may be quite different than the end of the year versus people going to holiday parties, Thanksgiving, and falling off the wagon, if you will, for keeping to their fitness goals. In the same fashion, the hospitality industry does have ebbs and flows. There are times when, for instance, catering is a very big deal. There are times when if you were to do a product and it was like, call it hot chocolate's probably not being purchased as much in the middle of summer. So keep that in mind as you compose this document. Finally, your team milestones, you'll notice that while I mentioned my team, there may not be a lot of progress for you in those terms, but I mentioned team represents people, processes, and partnerships. So as you think about what you're going to do during the year, try to think about areas that you may be accenting that. Did you buy a new piece of equipment? Are you using a new partner? Or did you just hire on a web development group to help you complete something within your business model? Did you just get a new mentor? Have you just recruited a new investor? Those things have a place and a time that were probably important on this achievement map. So just make sure that you're thinking critically about all the different aspects of your business and trying to be as realistic and intuitive and thoughtful about what's going to happen and when, and especially mentioning those things that didn't quite make the cut for the annual report, but will have to make the cut for this document. In terms of composition, we do hope that you keep it brief. Please do not tell us your life story in each block. Try to get to the point as quickly as possible, highlighting things that are the most important across each of the documents. If you were to compare all of the documents together, meaning the annual report, the milestone map, the cash runway, and everything else, they should have that level of consistency that when you look in June and it says that I hired the salesperson, that should also be stated in the exact month and what it was in the annual report. And if it makes a difference to the cash flow statement or any of the other documents, should also be the same. So please keep in mind, try to be congruent and consistent across all of these things. Finally, I will mention again that you have the opportunity to explain yourself in the bottom portion before you submit. Again, going back to the example that you can input, there's a whole thing right here where you can actually write in any other information that might be relevant to what you're doing or explanation as to information that we need. This does not have to be a singular page, but please try to keep it brief, ideally a maximum of 2 pages, meaning a front and back sheet rather than like 4 pages in essence. So that concludes what I need for the Venture Challenge, Challenge 3 milestone map. The next document that we'll be looking at will be Challenge 4, the cash flow runway.